It's been exactly 365 days since the government did bring about demonetization, an issue that's been hotly debated, hotly criticized, and very well defended as well. But who better than former Finance Minister P Chidambaram in conversation with us right here at ET Now to put into perspective why he believes demonetization was a failure. Thank you very much for speaking to us on demonetization. A year into this big decision, we can debate how disruptive it was, we can debate the demerits and the merits of it, but this will be a landmark day in India's financial and economic history, given the sweeping changes that came about after that. The former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh today and yesterday has said that while we all agree it was a decision not well taken, but we need to move beyond that, we need to move beyond the politics and begin rebuilding. And in the same sentiment, I'll urge you to help me with your inputs on rebuilding the economy. I know your view on demonetization, and I also know the Congress party's views on demonetization, but
they are the same.
Yes, and I don't think I can have a binary discussion anymore. And so I've identified broadly 7 things that the government is saying in defense of demonetization to take this conversation forward. One of the things and one of the primary reasons that the government gave then and continues to give now is a crackdown on black money. And they are putting out statistics like shell companies, nearly 2.97 lakh shell companies, of which 2.24 lakh had to be deregistered, 1150 shell companies found to be laundering money worth 13,300 crore rupees. These are statistics that tell you there was a large stock and flow of black money in the system, and the idea was to crack down on that. Are you going to dispute it?
You could have cracked down on shell companies without demonetization. All that you had to ask the shell companies to do was, are they filing returns? Do they have a board of directors? Are they compliant with the Companies Act otherwise? If they are not compliant with the Companies Act, they're not filing their returns to the ROC. Half the companies don't. And if they don't have a board of directors, if they're not compliant with the law on board of directors, you could have simply deregistered them and, as a consequence, frozen their bank account and asked them to account for the money in their bank accounts. Why did you have to heap misery upon millions and millions of people just to crack down on shell companies? If they had gone to any company lawyer, he would have told you how to crack down on shell companies. Therefore, point 1 is rejected.
So first argument is rejected by you. The second argument given, and I think the finance minister even speaks about it, is the terror funding angle. The idea then was to choke that angle. Without pointing to data, he points to instances of how stone pelting events have gone down in the valley, and he attributes this to demonetization. He says this is on account of the funding that was choked when demonetization occurred to these terrorist organizations, which is why we've seen events like this go down. You're not just a former finance minister, you also held the home portfolio, and successfully so. Are you going to disregard that argument entirely?
To link stone pelting with 500 and 1,000 rupee notes is, I think, a travesty of the truth. Stone pelting takes place because of the angst, the anger among youth, and because of the objective conditions in the valley. Now, as autumn comes to an end and winter begins and winter sets in, stone pelting comes to a virtual stop. Don't come to the conclusion that stone pelting has stopped. I'm not advocating stone pelting. But the answer to stone pelting is not to heap misery on millions and millions of Indians all over the country. The answer to stone pelting is to sit down with them and hold a dialogue. I think this connection that they are making is an absurd connection. Suppose stone pelting starts again next summer, God forbid. But suppose it starts again next summer due to some provocation, good or bad. Would you then say demonetization is a failure? What is the connection between the two?
But you have choked reasonable sources of funds to terrorist organizations.
Let's go by the data, which is why I think the government is avoiding the data. Let's go by the data. I've written about it. The data shows the number of infiltrations, the number of security personnel killed, the number of civilians killed, and the number of terrorists killed in 2017 is more than the similar numbers in 2016. So how do you say that violence has come down?
Okay, let me move to the third argument that the government is making, and that's arrest of counterfeit currency. We cannot deny the RBI data here. And perhaps this wouldn't have been done without demonetization, because data seems to suggest that in fiscal year 16, there were 2.4 pieces of fake 500 rupee notes for every 1 million notes that were processed, and 5.8 pieces of 1000 rupee notes for every 1 million processed. That number has gone up to 5.5 pieces for 500 rupee currencies and currency notes, and 12.4 pieces for the 1000 rupee denomination. Will you not attribute this to demonetization?
Where do you get these numbers? The RBI's report, when it admitted 99% of the currency came back,
That's right.
said it's 0.0007% worth 41 crore rupees. Out of 99% of 15 lakh 46,000 crore rupees worth of currency, they have detected 41 crore worth of currency. The earlier report of the Indian Statistical Institute said 400 crore rupees worth of currency is in circulation. RBI has detected only 41 crore, and that's 0.0007. Therefore, where is the fake currency will come? Moment a currency note comes, within 2 years or so, fake currency makes its appearance, which is why the RBI immediately changes the security features.
That's right.
Now, the most counterfeited currency in the world is the dollar note. If dollar note can be counterfeited, why can't the Indian currency be counterfeited? It will be counterfeited, but you don't panic on that, because the number will be small, and you can always stay one step ahead of the counterfeiter by changing the security features from time to time.
One of the other arguments the finance minister speaks about when he defends demonetization, and many within his cabinet, is that new taxpayers have come into the fold. Now, I agree that new taxpayers have come and they're not commensurate with the tax collections, but new taxpayers have been added to the system. Numbers quoted by him suggest 56 lakh new individual taxpayers filed their returns up until August 5th of this year, which was the last date for individual taxpayers, versus 22 lakh last year. Are you going to deny the fact that in the long term, maybe demonetization has pointed us towards a constituency of taxpayers who should have been paying taxes but weren't paying so?
It's possible. It's possible that there is a rise in taxpayers, but look at 2004 to 2009. There was a rise in taxpayers also. We went after the non-filers, that is, people who don't file at all. A large number came into the fold. We went after stop filers, people who file and then stop. A number came into the fold. Therefore, there are ways to bring non-filers and stop filers back into the system. But let me, for the sake of argument, accept that demonetization, along with other measures, has brought in some more people to file. The numbers are only a 15% rise over the previous year.
That's right.
But that has happened in the past also. A 15% rise has happened in the past also. But I'm not grudging the rise of 15%. But the test is twofold. One is, according to Arvind Subramaniam, the CEA, the average amount of income returned is 2.7 lakhs of the new filers.
That's right.
Which is barely above the threshold, number one. Number two, how many of these filers will become stop filers next year? Can only be tested in the next 2-3 years.
Yes.
So while I welcome that more people are filing today, and perhaps demonetization was impetus to file returns, I think the same results have been achieved in the past. Again, I go back. For getting X number of people to file their tax returns, do you heap misery on millions of people? That's the ethical question. And the government is not willing to answer that ethical question.
No, I'll tell you why I'll spend just one more minute on taxpayers, because a lot of us who pay taxes end up paying for those who are evading taxes. And so it's a very emotional issue.
Well, that's a specious argument.
All right.
You pay tax on your income. What you should really argue is, if more people paid tax,
my tax could be a lot lower, right?
Your tax will not be lower unless the tax rate is lower.
That's what I mean.
But this government has not indicated it will lower tax rates. The last finance minister to lower tax rates was myself.
Is sitting right in front of me. But the amount involving suspicious transactions based on various estimates range from 1.67 lakh crores to 1.7 lakh crore rupees. Now, of course, there's data analytics and all kinds of tax, tax department officials are looking into it. They're trying to seize that amount. Isn't that also going to add to the tax bounty eventually?
See, we can't speculate on that. I set up the FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit, which captures suspicious transactions and reports to the CBDT. Millions of pieces of information come, of which they distill, say, a few hundred and send it to the CBDT. Of the few hundred that are sent to the CBDT, CBDT is able to take up, say, a couple of hundred a year. That's all the CBDT's capacity to go after these STRs are concerned. Now, today, maybe there are more STR reports coming, more pieces of information. It's only when all this is distilled and you reduce the number and the CBDT goes after them, you will ultimately know what is the gain in tax. I think we are counting our chicken before they are hatched. All this information was there before demonetization, is there after demonetization. But let's see what the results are. Don't count your chicken before they hatch. Don't say 1.67 lakh crore is my income.
But will you stand corrected if money comes out from these suspicious transactions?
Of course they will come. They've come before also. Once we set up the FIU and STRs came, money did come. If there are more STR reports, money will come, but over a period of time. But as you're counting it as though the money is in your hands today.
I'm going to turn focus to the other argument and one of the merits of demonetization that the government makes us count, which is the currency in circulation. And explain this to me, because apparently the currency in circulation vis-a-vis 8th of November when it was announced to now is down about 3.89 lakh crore rupees. It points us to the direction that we perhaps are less cash, more digital economy. We've also seen UPI transactions go up. We've seen a jump in credit and debit card usages. Are you going to rule the fact that we are a less cash and a more digital economy? Yes, cash did rebound. I'm not going to dispute that. But there's been an upswing in non-cash as well.
Part of your data is correct, part of it is wrong. The data that is right is cash to GDP was about 12%.
That's right.
Now it's come down to about 8 point something. There is a decline in cash to GDP. Where the argument fails is it good or bad? Why do you assume that if the cash to GDP ratio declines, it is good? Or if cash to GDP ratio increases, it is bad. I'll tell you why.
I'll tell you why am I saying that.
You didn't say that.
I'm sorry to
I'll tell you why it is not, you can't draw any conclusion.
I will be the devil's advocate and first tell you what the government's argument is. The government defends that by saying that less cash or less cash in circulation or less cash to GDP, like you're rightly pointing out, means there is less anonymous source of funding in the economy. Cash is anonymous, cash can be black money.
Specious argument. I'll tell you why. Two reasons. Cash to GDP is a measure of the money supply.
That's right, yes.
Now, how much money supply should be there to sustain 6% growth or 7% growth or 8% growth is a matter for the RBI to decide. In fact, there is a powerful argument that the sudden lowering of cash to GDP has reduced demand, which is one of the reasons why the GDP growth is not picking up as much as it should if all other things being equal. So cash to GDP ratio is not a matter for the government to decide. It can't be decided by fiat. There are today formulae for calculating what is the optimal cash to GDP, but these are not precise formulae. The RBI takes in all the data and then decides how much money supply is required in the economy. In fact, I am inclined to agree with the argument that a sudden reduction in money supply is one of the reasons why GDP growth has dropped. That is the first point. The second point is, you are saying more cash means more anonymous transaction.
That's right.
This, I've explained it before, this completely misses the structure of India's economy. It is one of the few countries in the world, maybe the rare country, where legitimate non-taxable income sits alongside legitimate taxable income.
Yes.
Farm income, charity, religious trusts, northeastern people, scheduled tribes, and people whose income is below the tax threshold. This is legitimate non-taxable income.
But I think I'm going to now turn the focus and talk about the other thing that they're saying in defense, and the finance minister has spoken extensively on this, which is that data points, and you've been a champion of this, so I'm presuming you'll have some sympathy towards at least this argument. Data points that there has been an increase in financial savings, whether it's in mutual funds, whether it's insurance premiums or bond markets, and it says of how the premium went up for insurance companies from November 2016, or net inflow into mutual funds went up by 155% year on year in the fiscal years. Corporate bond issuance grew at 1.78 lakh crore rupees. Are you going to, I mean, because you've been a champion of formalization of the economy itself, will you not at least cut them slack on this one?
Listen, I will cut slack, but let's understand why money is flowing. See, money was with the public. You then said, if you hold it in your hand, it's worthless. Force them to bring it to the banks. They brought the money back to the banks. All of it has come back. Let's start there. Now, the banks have lowered the deposit rates.
That's right.
Numerous people have complained to me, what is this, if you lower the deposit rates, how do we survive? Those who live on fixed deposits, how do we survive? Pensioners, senior citizens. True. I try to explain to them, if deposit rates don't go down, lending rates won't go down, but it doesn't cut ice with them. But they are savers, they're not borrowers. Now, when banks started lowering the interest rate, money started flowing out of banks into other avenues, other instruments, which is one of the reasons why the stock market, the P ratio has gone to 27.
That's right. Yes.
Are you seriously suggesting in India's economy is so robust that it can sustain or justify a 27 P ratio? Money is going because risk takers are saying, listen,
there's no point earning 4.5%.
It's zero risk in banks, but I'm earning less than 4%. Therefore, let me put it in mutual fund, let me put it in stock market, let me put it in some other financial instruments which will get me a better return, which is good in itself. But please understand that this flow into this is because money with the hands of the people has been forced to come into the banks first.
But isn't that a positive outcome then?
In a sense it is positive, in a sense it is negative.
Why do you say
as long as money was in the hands of the people, banks were not paying interest. And when money comes into the hands of the bank, banks have to pay interest on that, which is one of the reasons why bank profits have taken a big hit.
Yes.
Ask any banker, he'll tell you his interest liability has gone up sharply because he's got to pay for all that money which is sitting idle in his banks. The money is idle, he's not lending. Small scale, medium, it is negative credit growth. That number again came out today. Negative credit growth. 3% or so small negative growth. Minus 5% medium industry negative growth. If credit is not going, the money is sitting idle in the banks.
You know, when we talk about demonetization and we do a cost benefit analysis, there has to be an economic cost of demonetization. I'm presuming that will be in the form of growth that has lowered, or the RBI dividend that has been cut. What, according to you, is the overall cost of demonetization?
By any estimate, GDP has fallen 1.5%. Look at the last 6 quarters.
But they believe it was a cyclical downturn of sorts, not.
We are talking about a 6-quarter decline that is not cyclical. We are talking about a decline over a period of 18 months. They are hoping for a cyclical upturn next quarter. I wish them well. But I want to see the trend. Is it declining or is it growing? 9, 7.5, 7, 6.1, 5.7. That is a decline over 6 quarters.
Yes.
That means between November last year and say the April, May, June of this year, the decline is from 7.1 to 5.7, a 1.4% decline. That is 2.25 lakh crore rupees is a hit on GDP.
And you will attribute all of this to
This is,
demonetization.
if this decline, not all of it, major part of it, is nothing else happened. No other disruptive event happened between November last year and June this year. 2,25,000 crore, number one. And number two, it hit gross fixed capital formation. Gross fixed capital formation has been declining. From the peak, it is down by almost 7-8%. Even from November last year to June this year, it has declined.
Yeah.
It has declined.
Yeah.
Which means if capital is not formed to that extent, there'll be no growth, there'll be no income, there'll be no jobs. That is an incalculable harm. And the third is simple act of demonetization. RBI numbers show that they spent 21,000 crore in handling the mechanics of demonetization, including printing of notes. And the money that has not come back to the RBI is only 16,000 crore.
That's right.
So to impound 16,000 crore, you have spent 21,000 crore. Whereas the CMI has got a much larger number. CMI's number is over 1 lakh crore is the cost, and they've given the breakdown. So I think the cost of demonetization, the calculable cost of demonetization, is at least 2.25 lakh crore.
I will ask you to, without being a critic and without wearing that hat of an opposition member, I will ask you to be candid and tell me there has been no positive collateral of demonetization whatsoever. That's difficult to imagine.
No, I'm not saying that. The only positive is that it has to some extent affected behavior.
Yeah.
To some extent. There are people who say, listen, maybe the consequences of avoiding tax are too high, risks are too high, let's change our behavior. It has applied to the taxpayer class, maybe 1 million people, maybe 2 million people, let's say even 2 million people, 3 million people, behavior has been positively affected. But the ethical question is, in order to change the behavior of 2 or 3 million people, do you heap misery on nearly 100 crore people? That's the question. My deepest regret is the government is not examining the ethical question. I started by saying no government, no elected government has a right to immiserize large sections of its population. That is a right only available to dictators.
I'm presuming that a lot of what you're saying resonates with a lot of people in India, and for all of us who had to stand in queues, I'm sure we have a view on demonetization as well. But why is it so that India endured demonetization without a whimper? And I'll ask you this question. I'll tell you why. Because a week before demonetization, Jallikattu happened and people were out on the streets. This is an emotional issue. This is about my money. And still there were no protests on the street. I know you will point to the fact that, and it's unfortunate that 100 people died standing in queues all across India, but there were no protests. People didn't take to streets, and this was a question about their own money. What will explain that? Is it because perhaps the credibility of the Prime Minister was so big? Did he stake so much political capital? I mean, what will you attribute to the fact that there wasn't
a number of factors. One is the shock. It was a shock and awe move. People went into deep shock, and they had to survive. Please understand, 15 crore people in this country are daily workers. 1/3 of India's labor force are daily employees.
That's right.
Daily workers.
Yeah.
They were in deep shock. They didn't know where the next meal will come from. Where will the next wage come from? Farm labor didn't get wages for several days. Therefore, there was a deep shock. I think as the people recovered from the shock, they had to scramble to keep their businesses together, families together, meet urgent expenses, hospital, school fees. They were, I think, deep shock. But today, if you talk to a bunch of people in any gathering, I was in Rajkot, I was in Mumbai, talk to any gathering of people, they will pour out their anger against demonetization. I have not heard a positive word about demonetization when I travel, railway stations, airports, gatherings. I've not heard anyone say positively about demonetization. Where are the positive voices of demonetization?
So if if people suffered so much and there was such anger, and the agrarian class and the daily wage laborers were obviously trying to make ends meet, as data and instances seem to suggest, how could the BJP reap such rich political dividends out of it?
I expected this question.
Yeah.
It's a question that is being repeated without understanding or appreciating the facts. What are the facts? We had elections in 5 states. Results came out on the same day. 2 of them were major states, UP and Punjab.
That's right.
In UP, the BJP had a resounding victory. In Punjab, it had a resounding, shattering defeat.
Yes.
So if you argue, as you impliedly argue, that the UP vote is a vote for demonetization, I will argue that the Punjab vote is a vote against demonetization. But let me tell you, both arguments are wrong. Elections are not fought on one issue. The election in UP and Punjab was not a referendum on demonetization. Therefore, you can't come to that conclusion. Now take the other 3 states, smaller states. 3 states.
And there's a very different story in how it unfolded.
Uttarakhand, Goa, Manipur. BJP came first in Uttarakhand. In Manipur and Goa, Congress came first. BJP was a distant second. It is a different matter, they stole the election. But out of 5 states, BJP was number 1 in 2 states, Congress was number 1 in 3 states. Question is, do you draw any conclusions vis-a-vis demonetization? My answer is no. You cannot draw any conclusion from election results vis-a-vis demonetization.
On that note, sir, thanks very much and wish you all the very best for
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.